Good. So that's fantastic. 622. Memorize the year. Memorize the year. It is year 1 on the Islamic calendar. But it is not when Muhammad is born. It is not when Muhammad dies. It is not even when Muhammad gets his first angelic message. What is 622? What happens in the year 622 that it is the beginning of the Islamic calendar? Anybody know? Okay, so he is a persecuted prophet. He's got a handful of followers. He's not very successful. But then there is a city to the north. The name of the city is Yathrib. Yathrib. I'll write that down. And Yathrib will become the city of Medina. The city of Yathrib is having some civil problems, and they've heard that this Muhammad fellow down in Mecca has a reputation as being kind of a fair broker. So they invite Muhammad and his supporters, they're called the Al-Ansar, the supporters of Muhammad, and they migrate to Yathrib. This is not a particularly large group of people, but this is called the migration. So the Arabic word for migration is hijrah. So oftentimes when you look at, it's like an Islamic newspaper or Islamic magazine or website, it'll have the regular date that we use, which is a pagan calendar, right, from the Roman Empire, modified by Christians later. But you will see this, A-H, after the hijrah. So the hijrah is the turning point in Muhammad's career. And this happens in 622. This is when he becomes not just a prophet, but a statesman. And he goes to Medina, and this is when you have a real shift in the content and the style of the chapters of the Quran. Because before, it's a lot of this poetry about the topics that I just told you about. But now he goes to Yathrib, and they will eventually rename this Medina Nabi. Medina is an Arabic word, it just means city. So in the same way that Byzantium is later renamed the city of Constantinople, they will later rename Yathrib to be Medina Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or simply the abbreviated Medina. So he becomes a statesman, not just a prophet, but a political ruler. And everything is going to change, because now, instead of just preaching his spiritual religious message about monotheism and social justice and natural revelation, he is basically in charge of running this city. This is where you run into some very unfortunate things. For example, his wife Khadija has died, and after Khadija dies, then he will engage in polygamy very vigorously. And there is a time when the angel says, for the average Muslim man, he can only take up to 4 wives, but for you, O Prophet, you can take up to 8 wives. Okay? And there's a great hadith, I'll tell you what the hadith are in a moment, where Aisha, his child bride, he is 50 years old, she is 6 years old when she is betrothed to him, she is 9 years old when he is a 50-year-old man, they consummate that sexual relationship, and this comes from the Islamic sources themselves. So, this is the ideal human being. This is the ideal man, according to Islamic thought. A man who would do something like that. So, here, when he is in Yathrib, he runs into Jews. And he has heard, and again, he's a merchant, so he's probably traveled around. And he runs into 3 Jewish tribes that live there. I'm not going to go into great detail about this. But he assumes that they will get on board with his monotheistic religion, because he's a monotheist. They're monotheists. Muhammad is in favor of the idea of prophets, right? He believes in that. And again, Christians and Jews say, yes, God from time to time sends a man, in the Bible sometimes a woman, but in the Islam I think it's only men in Islam. He sends a man with a particular message for a group of people, and sometimes it's just a verbal message, but sometimes it's a message that is going to be written down, like David with the Psalms, or Moses with the Torah, or Jesus with the Injil, the Gospels, the Evangel. But most of the prophets are just giving messages, like Noah. Noah didn't ever write anything down, for example. And there are a couple of prophets in the Quran that don't appear in the Bible, but most of them, mostly it overlaps. So he runs into the Jews, and the Jews say, well, Moses got us bread from heaven. This is a challenge that Jesus ran into, incidentally. Moses gave us bread from heaven. What are you going to do to show us a miracle, to show us that you are a real prophet from God? And Muhammad cannot do a miracle. So what he thinks will be a group that will be on board with his ministry, his career, turns out to not be, and his relationship with the Jews sours. The Jews are wealthy. They have real estate and land and farms and groves of trees and so on. And eventually, to make a long story short, he is able to either exile, execute, or enslave all three Jewish tribes that were there in the city of Yathrib, in the city of Medina. And this is very important. This is a very shrewd, intelligent move on his part, because then he is able to take all of that real estate and all that wealth and to redistribute it to his allies. And of course, if you're up there in Medina, and now all of a sudden you have a political ruler who is a Muslim, and he's got all these resources that he can hand out to his friends, well, then you have a lot of incentives to get on his right side. He is very sensitive, Muhammad is very sensitive about his Quranic revelation. People can insult him personally, and sometimes he'll be like, whatever. But when people belittle the literary quality of his ayat, his Quranic verses, he cannot deal with that. He has a really hard time with that. So we have a story, another hadith, that says, this lady who is a poet, she says that your verses are very substandard and lousy. And then Muhammad, he cannot deal with that. So he says to his men, who will rid me of this terrible person? And the guy says, yes, I will bring you her head by the evening. And he does. He goes, cuts off her head and brings it to Muhammad. And Muhammad is very happy with this. So everything is really shifting. And the concerns from before have gone away. So a lot of what I'm telling you, you can find it in a book by Montgomery Watt. It doesn't represent the most up-to-date scholarship, but it's first of all a book that you can get online because it's not a newer book. And it's a short book, so you can read the whole thing in about a couple of days. And it's called Muhammad, Prophet and Statesman. And again, it's about this shift from his role as a prophet who is largely marginalized, has a spiritual message, to being a statesman. One of my favorite quotes or observations that I've ever found about Muhammad is by a guy named Kenneth Cragg. Kenneth Cragg he's an Englishman, he's deceased now. And Kenneth Cragg was the bishop in Jerusalem, the Anglican bishop in Jerusalem. He was the associate bishop. It used to be that the Diocese of Jerusalem used to have an Arab bishop and would always have an assistant bishop who was English so that they could minister to the Arab-speaking congregations and the English ones. Kenneth Cragg was the English bishop assisting in Jerusalem. And he has some profound insights about Islam. He was very formative to me over the years, especially early on when I was learning about Islamic origins. And so he had the ability to be critical of Islam, but at the same time be civil and respectful. This is not always an easy balance to keep, but Kenneth Cragg did this. Kenneth Cragg said this. This is, I think, one of the most profound insights about Islam that you will ever hear anywhere. And I've read a lot of Islam. Muhammad, in expanding his empire, managed to start a religion. Muhammad, in expanding his empire, managed to start a religion. Now, why is this so important? Because it tells us something very profound and true about Islam and about Muhammad. By the end of his life, he is primarily a political ruler. And indeed, the people under him will start raiding the caravans. Now, they will justify it. They will say, well, the people in Mecca took stuff away from us, so they deserve it. So we're going to get back at them. And eventually, Muhammad is able to overcome the city of Mecca. He is able to go back victorious to the city of Mecca. Because in Islam, winning the military battle, winning the political battle, how do you know that God is with you or that Allah is on your side? Because you win. You win. That's how you know that God is on your side. Compare that to Jesus. Did Jesus win? I guess theologically, the ascension into heaven, someday he'll win. But just on the historical level, he ends up being crucified as a Roman criminal in a very ghastly and really disgusting way. It doesn't look like Jesus wins. Islam is all about winning. And Muhammad wins. He goes from being a marginal spiritual prophet to being a governor of a city, to being a warlord, and then he goes back to the place that originally rejected him, and he takes control of it. He goes back into the Kaaba, and he destroys all the idols, but, and this is very shrewd, this is very intelligent of him, he realizes that the Kaaba is very important for the economic well-being of Mecca, because all these pilgrims come from everywhere. And then he says, hey, the angel told me that Muslims now have to come and do pilgrimage here in Mecca. So the merchants are worried about their source of income, and Muhammad is out, you're still going to have your source of income. And a lot of the merchants are like, oh, okay. So you go to some of the beautiful churches in Madrid, there's people in front of it selling stuff. A lot of them are not religious. A lot of them are not even Christians. A lot of them are Muslims, basically. But that's their income. So they care about that cathedral, and they care about the pilgrims coming to the cathedral, because without that, even though spiritually they don't believe in any of it, but they care about it because economically that is their income. So Muhammad is able to kind of soften the blow, say, oh, there's still going to be pilgrimage. And of course he gets another revelation. Do you know who built the Kaaba according to Muhammad? They're fellows that you know from Genesis. Abraham and his son Ishmael. Wow, who knew that Abraham got all the way down there into Arabia to build the Kaaba? But according to Muhammad, he did. So Muhammad is tying together all these different things. And the people of Mecca, some of them are not very happy about it. Some of them are like, okay, this is a good thing. So then by the end of his life, he has taken control both of Mecca and Medina. In the year 632, he dies. So 23 years, I had said, the length of his career, it's about 23 years. And there's a biography of him written by a secular Iranian named Ali Dashti that's called 23 Years, which you can also download and read the PDF online. So 23 years, interesting. How long does Jesus' public ministry last? About 3 years. Maybe 4, maybe 5, but probably the best guess is 3 years, right? This is a big difference, a really big difference. 23 years versus 3 years.